Good evening and welcome back to your view with me, JJ Tawan. We're coming to you live from Linden here in Johannesburg. And of course, tonight, our newsmaker, we're focusing on the coronavirus. And to help me understand this, Siya Beniza joins me tonight to just try and make me understand. Mr. Beniza, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're not afraid of the shouting is just for the coach. Don't worry. Be at home.
No problem, no problem.
Listen, man, the coronavirus thing is interesting because if you look at the map, and we've got lots of international news broadcasters showing us the map, and Africa literally still being almost cushioned so far. Yeah. How do you explain that?
Must be our strong prayers. No, because honestly, the response that I've been seeing, at least from our country and a lot of other countries, has been to sort of hope that the Chinese will deal with the matter. I don't think that there is an understanding of building domestic capacity to deal with the crisis, more than please contain the crisis in China, respond and find a vaccine as soon as possible. That's really what the hope is. And I mean, that's shown by, I think it was a Central or West African country that donated $8 million to the Chinese government to deal with the coronavirus.
Serious?
And I mean,
an African country donated to China. Are you being real?
And that raises the question whether that $8 million could have been better used domestically to build
fight
up
EBOLA in the
capacity.
DRC. Did that country donate money to Mara, honestly, man?
But it goes to show where the people are hedging their bets. People are really banking on the fact that they hope Chinese government will deal with the issue and contain the spread.
What's your assessment there, though, of the readiness of African countries to deal with it? I see that South Africa has literally, thrown a very strong, ring of fire. I mean, I came back from Ethiopia last week, and the army got on board to test everyone aboard Ethiopian Airlines before we got off the plane, before you can actually touch the ground. So I thought, wow, I felt safe to say, things are serious about it. And when we get to passport control, there they are again with the same device to make sure that if they missed anything, they are able to clamp down there. Is there a similar level of agileness, of readiness across the continent?
Sure. Look, I must give our African leaders one thing. They've been quite good at building capacity to contain viral issues. You must remember, obviously, we're still coming on the back of the Ebola virus that broke out in West and Central Africa. There's still parts of Central Africa still dealing with the virus to this day. The Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, has still got, I think, over 28 cases of deaths in the last 3 months, and they're still dealing with the case and being challenged by issues like national security, access to the people, etc. So these are still major challenges. I don't know, though, whether African governments have got capacity beyond containing the spread in terms of creating vaccines, etc. What is more likely to happen is that if we do get the cases of coronavirus on the continent, there will be a strong response in terms of containment. But I think then what will happen is we'll either find a treatment somehow or attach ourselves to the WTO rules to administer generic medicines as a response to the crisis. So I think, yes, there's containment capacity, but beyond that, curing the virus or finding a cure domestically, I don't think we have that capacity.
China, do you think China has risen to the occasion? I understand there was an overnight hospital that was built in 6 days or something like that to try and deal with this whole thing. The ambassador of China to South Africa spoke to the media over the weekend, painting a picture that says it's declining. The number of cases are declining. What's your assessment there? Is China rising to the occasion to contain this? Are they succeeding?
Sure. So what we've seen is, I think, very, very strong response from China. As you've said, they've built the first hospital facility for, I think, 1,000 beds for coronavirus patients in a matter of days. They've added capacity to that, I think, an additional 2,000 beds in a matter of weeks that we've been facing the crisis up to now. In addition to this, though, I do want to commend, I think, the international response beyond this. The Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation just donated over $100 million towards fighting the viral spread. And I think the Chinese government and its technical or, capacity domestically, I think has got ability to contain the virus, as you've seen in the number of deaths, which I think now has curbed just over 100, 108, 110, whereas the number of cases have been increasing. We've seen over the past week that, another 15,000 cases have been found, bringing the cases to over 30,000 in China. But what we've seen is actually a sharp, stop almost in the number of deaths, which is critically where you want to actually have an effective response. And what do they attribute
that to? Is it because they are getting closer to a vaccine, and maybe they are testing the vaccine and it's been working, even though it's not 100%?
So there hasn't been a lot of progress in terms of coming up with a vaccine or coming close to any cure. Currently, most of the stop or the curbing in terms of the death numbers has been purely due to treatment and people being contained. The strong response in terms of quarantine, a whole province has been quarantined to the extent that, there are about 28 South African students who have graduated in the province, not necessarily from the Wuhan city where, there's ground zero, but are still stuck within the province and cannot move. So I think the Chinese government response in terms of freezing the movement of people or curbing the spread is very effective, and this is what I think is the main reason for the deaths coming to a sharp halt. You can imagine that with the numbers spreading elsewhere, the virus also gets time to mutate, make it more difficult to deal with it in terms of vaccinations, etc. And so what has been happening and the response so far, I think, has been quite effective.
In terms of business, talk about what it means from a business perspective. China, obviously, a big international player in the global economy. Right? People are suggesting that this may have to do somehow, and I was always conspiracy theories when you see
bioterrorism, etc.
Yeah, it's like when leprosy was first discovered. They used to say when you Timol and they say bless you, they're saying that you are going to your grave. And it was a conspiracy at that time. Right now, you say bless you, people will think that your corona is coming for you. But let's leave the conspiracies a little bit and say, economically, what has been the impact, right? There were indications that some factories have been stopped, some exports have been stopped, etc., etc. That may have a ripple effect across the world. What's your analysis there?
Sure. Look, on my part, I think I've been caught on the back foot on this one. My initial response to this was it's going to be a medium-term impact mainly. I didn't put this past maybe 18 months, 9 months to 18 months. Yeah. But I think the fact that it's ongoing and the fact that now we're seeing deaths outside of China, etc., they've recorded the first death in Europe, etc., there are 8 cases in the US. I'm starting to see that it might have a much broader impact. And yes, there have been factories that have been shut down. Obviously, the quarantining and lack of movement of people has also meant that a province, which is quite close to Shenzhen, which is a major industrial hub in China, has also been under lockdown. Which has a knock-on impact on the economy. So far, I don't think that we've been able to measure the quantitative impact of the lack of movement, but definitely it's going to have an impact. Major events are now being cancelled, such as the Tokyo Marathon, for example. And already we're starting to see that a lot of things that are going to create economic activity and opportunity are now being relooked. Chinese school holidays have been extended. The Chinese government has made a pledge to companies and employers to be more flexible in terms of people's ability to show up to work, etc. And all of this is obviously going to add up and have an impact. Obviously, it comes on the back of the Chinese government, or the Chinese economy rather, facing some challenges domestically on its own. And so the added impact of this, and as well as the trade war against the US, is
Would that weaken the Chinese hand in the trade war?
I'm not certain that it could weaken the Chinese hand in the trade war, because I think the trade war issues are not necessarily related to the movement of people, etc., and not directly linked, at least, to the virus, unless you're one of the conspirators who think that this is actually bioterrorism. But
why is the US so quiet, though?
They're dealing with their own issues. Currently, they're facing their electoral cycle, so right now everybody's focused on, which candidates are going to come up in the 2020 elections, etc. So for them, it's a slightly different case. They've also got their own number of cases that they've had to deal with. They've also said quite clearly that they're willing to put a freeze on routes between China and the US until the issues are dealt with. And so they are taking a proactive look. It's just that their cycles are focused on other things at the moment. But I think, jokes aside, the Chinese response and how it's been dealing with this and the economic impact is going to be there. I'm now sort of revising what I think is going to be the impact. I think we probably have two routes out of this.
Okay.
Either a route where we come up with a vaccine and distribute it, using whether the World Trade Organization rules in order to provide generics, etc., to people in the affected areas. And I think that will take probably 3 years to resolve. And another route which is saying this will probably resolve in treatment. Probably the number of deaths will decline as we find more effective treatment, and eventually it'll become like a case of the Ebola. The Ebola virus now, at least the current phase we're facing with, is close to almost 10 years, and their country is still dealing with the cases. Yes, we're over the initial peak and the initial shock, but I think the impact is still being felt in many areas in West Africa and Central Africa particularly. And so I think a similar type of scenario will play itself out with regards to the coronavirus.
Yeah. Do you think there's a continental strategy to deal with this? I mean, Africa just emerged out of an AU summit last week. I'm not aware whether they dealt with it in terms of sharing best practice. I don't know whether regional economic communities, any of them have met specifically on how to combat this and secure the continent.
Sure. So there is a view on a continental stage, but I think more than anything at the moment, the initiatives are driven by countries at a national level. The real focus at a continental level is still with dealing with the Ebola virus. As our president made our commitments at the African Commission that he will continue to provide support through the South African lab that is looking at finding a vaccine or a response to the Ebola virus. And so the focus is still largely on that. At a national level, this is where really countries are responding. Our Minister of Health has come out to say that we're quite ready to deal with the virus in terms of containment. He's outlined that Charlotte Maxeke, Tembisa Hospital, as well as, I can't remember, some hospital in Johannesburg, a third hospital have been earmarked as the key hospitals to deal with the coronavirus nationally. However, this also raises the concern that other international ports of entry such as Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, etc., which could also bring a risk. But I'm assuming that government's view is that most of the traffic from Asia will be coming through OR Tambo, and as such has focused its response in terms of earmarking hospitals within Gauteng. And so there is a view in terms of countries increasing capacity to deal with viral outbreaks, but we're still dealing with the last crisis we dealt with in terms of Ebola. And so the response to coronavirus has been largely at a national level.
After the break, I want to talk about what the implications of this may be. There's always an argument that says our borders are very porous. We've got 4 million people from Zimbabwe here, half of whom may not even have proper papers. I know it's a summation, not the reality, but the porous borders issue may be, and it may create nervousness about whether indeed, if Zimbabwe, for example, is not having this under control, or even a Swaziland. I'm told there was one case in Eswatini, whether if our neighbors are not in control, we may be in danger. But we'll talk about that after the break. Of course, you can give us a ring if you want to participate in this conversation on 010-594-5140. Let's take a break now. And good evening and welcome back to Your View. It's a new season of Your View here on Newsroom Africa. We're coming to you now live every Sunday to Thursday at 8 p.m. Central African Time. Speaking through to power, of course, flanked by Lindy Serame, who will, of course, take you to midnight and giving you the roundup of the day every 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, as well as give us a news feed at the top of every hour every night. Of course, you can give us a ring throughout the show on 010-594-5140. Do remember, at the top of the hour, our first frank talk in this season is with Herman Mashaba. Gonna tell me about what on earth is the People's Dialogue and what did he pick up then. Of course, he'll also weigh in on the state of the nation, as it's the season to do that, because tomorrow our politicians weighing in the debate, and of course we hope the president replying before the end of the week. So we are really dissecting the state of the nation. But affecting that state of the world is the coronavirus, which is our newsmaker tonight. Porous borders, is that a red flag or not?
I think definitely, but I'm not certain that South Africa and countries in the region are definitely at risk or major risk of this. Yes, there was the fear.
Eswatini, did the persons pass through Joburg though?
So that's the thing, right? So most of the people traveling internationally, at least with our neighboring countries, Lesotho, Botswana, Namibia to some extent, and Botswana to some extent as well, all travel through
Joburg.
And so this kind of minimizes the impact of the actual border posts via land. Unless, of course, they've got cases that become uncontrollable to such an extent that the domestic population is at risk, and as such then pour through. There was the fake case which has been dismissed by our Minister of Health in supposedly affecting the Free State from Lesotho through Vicksburg.
There's a fake case?
This has been dismissed as it's a non-issue. So at this point, officially, there haven't been any reported.
But Lesotho is a full colony there of Chinese, eh?
Yes,
full colony. I mean, you can call Lesotho Chinatown, basically. So maybe it was not so fake.
Throughout the region, they are concerned, but I think, as I said, most of the traffic in the region goes through OR Tambo. There are very few countries directly flying to Asia and other international spots. So that allows us at least to have some level of control over containing the virus.
Tourism, I mean, that must suffer because, and I don't know the figures, but there's a big chunk of our tourism figures that are accounted for by travel by the Chinese to this part of the world.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of them, as you mentioned, the Chinese population is quite big in a lot of our neighboring countries, Lesotho being one of them, Zambia being another, and as far as Malawi, etc. And I think the tourism industry is definitely going to be the biggest victim out of this. Not only just domestic tourism, but also tourism going out of the continent into parts of Asia, etc. And obviously this is also linked not just to leisurely tourism, also business tourism, and some level of goods and exports will be quarantined, which has another direct impact. So not just the tourism industry, but other related industry, logistics being one of them, are also going to be definitely affected by the virus and the need to contain people and the movement of goods. And
airlines, do you think they are agile enough to deal with this? Because they're the ones who are going to be carrying people, with either without checking them first, and they just board and go to another place and spread this thing, and so on. What's your take there?
So I think airlines have been quite responsive. Obviously, the airline industry is a very precarious industry, hence the reliance on government subsidies, etc. And hence, the failure of even our own airlines, such as SAA, etc. It's a difficult operating environment, period. But I think what they've been able to do quite well is to respond in terms of being a first port of call before dealing with customs in order to deal with some of the cases that might have gone through in terms of other countries or from Asia, etc., coming in. And so this has obviously led to a lot of people being frustrated, etc., with changes in security protocols. Most people say, you normally just spray. What's happening now with these individual checks that are taking place, etc., online. And I think that's quite a valuable service that the airlines are playing as a first port of call. Obviously, they would definitely be affected by the reduction in numbers, but also restrictions on extra flights.
Would it be fair to say it's quite risky because it's an airborne disease? So if somebody slips into an aircraft that is 10 hours long, I mean, we're facing a disaster.
Definitely, definitely. And again, people are banking on the hope that, Chinese quarantining will work. But again, the airlines is serving as that first port of call before they enter onto South African land, etc., or through our ports. It does provide an extra level of security, but it's still a very precarious and challenging working environment.
Yeah. Some conspiracy things to round off now. The person who discovered the virus is dead.
I didn't know that. But I've heard conspiracies that there's supposedly a patent for the coronavirus lodged in the U.S. And this obviously raises questions as to if there is a patent for such a virus, where's the antidote or the vaccine? That's you would assume that nobody would be passing patents for viruses without a vaccine.
Yeah.
And so maybe there is hope that there would be some sort of quick response in terms of a virus and dealing with the problem.
Yeah.
But at this point, all of this is still speculation. I think a lot of the impact and the true, real results of the coronavirus is something that we will discover as we go along or as we experience the virus.
Yeah. And in your view, as governments taken proactive steps, first of all, in terms of educating the populations about it, there was a clip on CNN that we had a look at when we were out in Ethiopia that was dealing just with this thing of wearing masks, that this thing doesn't work, it's useless to wear this mask because this thing is so airborne, it doesn't matter, you're just going to inhale it whether you're wearing a mask or not. Yeah. Is there a desperation to try and do everything? I mean, I saw in some clips where they are shutting down whole villages, sealing whole villages for people not to leave, etc. Are all these things just maybe red herrings and in fact there isn't anything of the sort?
Well, look, I think on the part of the severity of the response, I think it goes with whether or not someone feels that it's sufficient or bad enough response. I mean, I was watching news feeds of the Chinese government literally spraying insecticide in public, in streets, etc. And trying to disinfect. And how do you really respond to contain an airborne virus?
Yeah.
Also in the most populous region, most populous country in the world. So there definitely are significant challenges there. In terms of our own responses here nationally and education of people about the virus, I don't think that enough has been done. Also, government is really taking a perspective or strategy to prepare itself in a reactive sense. I don't think that we're taking a proactive approach to say these are the ways, and most importantly, beyond anything else, it seems personal hygiene, etc., is really what matters. I'm learning now as well that the masks are not sufficient. Yeah. It's not sufficient protection. But I think within weeks, I was one of the people Googling online to find out where can I get these masks. But I think we're still in the comfort zone, given that there haven't been any cases publicly reported, and we've been reassured repeatedly by our health authorities that they're ready to deal with this. And obviously, ultimately, a lot of people's hopes are that the Chinese will be able to resolve this, and they've got everything to lose.
Is there a moratorium on Chinese imports at the moment?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment.
Oh my God!
I'm not even certain.
But if they package these things, and then and nobody checked, isn't that the danger? If this is airborne, it means that when they unwrap the packaging.
Oh, so there's quarantining on goods from Wuhan and the province generally. So no movement of goods out and no movement of people out. But I'm not certain whether globally there's a quarantine on Chinese goods, because obviously a lot of the trade and exports don't necessarily happen. A lot of the things that are probably in logistics now are things that were sold or paid for at the end of last year.
Long ago, they're probably
you're dealing with products that are from January or at least the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And so I'm not certain how Chinese authorities and even our customs are aiming to deal with that on a goods level rather than just the movement of people. But currently I think the response is focused on the movement of people, and I think as perhaps the customs register come to goods that were either produced or packaged in the months where the virus was publicly known, they might then start to quarantine goods or at least put them through certain tests or additional sanitary tests that they put them through.
Finally, the South African response, has it been adequate in your view?
I don't think it's been fully adequate. I do think, though, that everybody's in comfort zone because there haven't been any cases reported on the continent. And the hope is that the Chinese government, given that the stakes they have, will resolve the issue. The fact that we've got 3 hospitals all situated in Gauteng in terms of our own ability to respond to this is a concern for me, mainly because traffic doesn't necessarily just come in directly. I mean, some people might have gone through different destinations, through Rwanda or through Ethiopia.
So maybe a hospital in Limpopo?
Exactly.
Next to the border there, and then one in Mpumalanga next to the Swatini border, when in fact there was a case.
Sure, and I think definitely in the major cities. At this point, though, I don't think that the response is really focused on land movement of people, more than air movement air traffic and freight and the like. And so I think, again, yes, you're right. That is a shortcoming of the approach, which is focused purely on air travelers, when in case people could have gone through, via sea or other ports of entry onto the continent.
I'm sorry, we've run out of time, but I was curious to know, why did you take an interest in this?
Coronavirus.
Yeah.
It has an impact globally. I mean, not just is it impacting one of the biggest economies globally, it's also impacting a huge development partner for African governments generally. And, as people who do, whether infrastructure investment or trade with China, we are at risk of somehow being exposed to the virus. And again, I don't think that the national response and preparedness is where it should be. Everybody is sort of hoping that the Chinese government will resolve the issue.